Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Amy Sam. I am the Health Education Project Specialist at the Maxwell and Eleanor Blum Patient Family Learning Center at Mass General. Abigail, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Abby, and I am the Blum Patient and Family Learning Center intern this summer.
Thank you. Before we get started, just want to go over a few items with you all. Please note that today's session is being recorded for educational purposes. If you're interested in viewing the recording, it'll be made available on the Blum Center website at massgeneral.org/Blum-Center. Please note that you're in listen-only mode. Everyone has music and hear our guest speaker today. If you have any questions for our guest speaker, you may use the chat feature, which is located at the bottom of your screen. We'll have time for them throughout the session. Only Blum Center staff and our guest speaker will see your questions. Please do not share any personal medical information or questions in the chat. If you have a personal medical question, please ask your doctor. Lastly, at the end of today's session, you'll be directed to a brief survey, which we'd like to ask you to help us complete. Your feedback is important to us as we plan future programs. Okay, so next I'm going to turn it over to Abigail, who will introduce today's guest speaker.
Thank you. I would like to welcome Susan Kessler today. Susan is a clinical social worker with extensive experience working with children with developmental delays and disabilities and their families. She is a family support clinician at the Lurie Center for Autism, where she provides support, information, and resource connections for families with children under age 7 who are Lurie Cancer Center patients. She also facilitates 2 parent caregiver workshops that are open to the community. She has a passion for helping children and families achieve the best quality of life. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Susan today.
Hi there, everybody, all you invisible people out there. I'm going to jump in and share my screen. Is that okay? All right. So, as Abigail said, I work at the Lurie Center for Autism, and we're going to go through a lot of information that hopefully will be useful to you all about young children, autism, and services that are out there. It'll be a whirlwind tour. There's way more information than I could possibly pack into 55 minutes. So you're going to get copies of the slides through Amy, through the center, which will include information about all the facts that we share. We're going to open it up, though, with a Zoom question for you all, a question for you all to answer in chat. And I'm sharing my slide. If you could put into chat just a little bit of information so I know a little bit about what you're interested in today, both your child's age, and if you have a top question you wanted to have answered today, that would be super helpful to me. I'm used to adapting this to participants, and it's a little unusual for me not to see you or to be able to talk with you. So I'd love it if you could give me a little guidance in what you're looking for today. So I'll give you all a minute to find chat and pop in some information. And generally, it's going to be an overview of autism, the diagnosis, as well as autism services for young children. So within that umbrella, if people have specific interests or questions, I would love to hear them. And if you feel like you really don't want to share and you're open to whatever, that's also good. We're going to cover these topics. So a little bit about autism, a little bit about the world of education, special education, a little bit about different therapeutic supports and additional supports and resources for families.
Hi, Susan. So we do have a participant who is joining mostly out of curiosity. They
Great.
don't have a small child, but know several people with children with this diagnosis.
Okay, perfect. So the overview setup will be helpful, and hopefully you'll listen and glean some facts and some pieces that will be helpful to the people that you know. Thank you for sharing that. I think I'll just launch because I'm happy to field questions along the way. So pop those into chat as well. I'm going to talk a bit about autism, the diagnosis. I'm including this slide, which is the clinical criteria for an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis from the DSM, which is Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is the tool that's used by diagnostic professionals to decide whether somebody qualifies for autism. And I'm not going to go into detail about this. Those of you who have children who've been diagnosed, hopefully your clinician has gone over this with you and explained how your child's behaviors match these criteria. Let's see, another question. Oh, that's Amy. Oh, look, there's a question. Okay. So I'm not going to share any identifying information, but I saw another chat introduction. It's for a child who's 5 years old. So this particular person is writing about her great niece who's 5 and is asking a very specific question about specific private school for autism. I will not be able to field that level of a personal question, but I do hope you'll listen when I talk about the educational system and kind of how to proceed and how to navigate that. You will get some information that I hope will be useful to you. So rather than spend time on this diagnostic criteria, I'm going to talk a little bit about some important facets of autism, which I think are helpful as parents and family members and friends reframe how they think about autism. It's a lifetime diagnosis. Children grow into adults, they mature, they learn, they change, but their brain function remains autistic. So there are certain characteristics that continue over time. That's a little bit of why we call it a neurodevelopmental diagnosis, that it lasts over time and it's a brain difference. There's a spectrum of behaviors and characteristics that are very similar to how we all have differences, whether or not we're autistic. So there's intelligence, there's interests, there's ability to focus, there's energy level. There are many variables that a child or adult with autism has within each of those kind of characteristics, which can be described as a spectrum or sort of an umbrella, right? There are a lot of differences that fall under the same autistic umbrella. So we don't necessarily know a lot about an individual child just by the diagnosis, other than those criteria that qualified them for the diagnosis. The diagnosis is super important, though, because it helps open doors for more services, such as special education, such as different therapies that we'll talk a little bit more about, and family support programs. It also hopefully will be helpful to families as they try to understand their child's differences and their child's needs, because there's something different about the way their brain functions, and they're not going to fit into a typical child mold. We talked a bit about how autism is diagnosed already. There are a variety of professionals who are able to do that in the state of Massachusetts. It's a behavioral diagnosis. There's no blood test. There's no sort of medical biological screening tool that's used. There's not even a genetic marker that identifies autism. It's solely through family history and observation and using behavioral screening tools that clinicians come to that diagnosis. And that can be a little unnerving for families who are used to a strep throat being diagnosed or anemia being diagnosed, right? This is a behavioral diagnosis. Autism itself is fairly common. 1 out of 36 children are diagnosed with autism. And of those, it is 2 to 5 times as common in boys than girls, more common in boys than girls. In some ways, girls are catching up because diagnosticians are getting more familiar with what an autistic girl might look like, so what the behavioral features might be. And there are differences between girls and boys in a very generalizable kind of way, with behaviors that they might have that still qualify as autistic. I do want to emphasize that there's no known single cause for autism. There are a variety of possible factors that are being researched. Most researchers believe there's a genetic component, and that genetic testing can identify some markers that are associated with autism, but not all. So genetic testing is recommended for children who are diagnosed with autism, but it may open some doors in terms of understanding, and it may come up with nothing in particular. So it's sort of a murky area. You can only, it will only add information, though, if there is information to be found. And sometimes it's useful to know a little bit more about if there are other factors associated with the autism. Let's see, out of these features of autism, I want to mention sensory processing differences, which is the third category here, because I think that's one of the harder things to understand about autism. We have 5 senses that we typically think about: vision, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. But there are other senses that have to do with the sense of motion and the sense of firmness of being grounded on the earth, or movement in space, where's your body, and firmness of how your joints feel when you're landing on them. So there are senses that we don't typically think about, right? But kids with autism have a variety of responses to sensory input that may look different from typical kids. Some kids with autism are what we call sensory seekers, in that they look for more sensory input. They may not feel things as strongly as a typical child might. So a child who's a sensory seeker in the tactile realm may like to touch certain textures, may like to roll on the floor, or cuddle a lot with parents, or require bear hugs. A child who's a sensory seeker in the area of movement or motion may be somebody who's constantly in motion, or likes to swing, or likes to be upside down. These things actually can help children organize their sensations, rather than how I would feel being swung around, which would make me terribly dizzy. A child with autism who's seeking that will help them organize their sensory system. And many times the behaviors that we see from kids who are disorganized, dysregulated, are where they might really feel uncomfortable and might be seeking more input in ways that are not super functional, or may be very upset and tantruming. So it's important to kind of learn your child's sensory thermometer and particular sensory needs to help them stay regulated. And I will talk about the specialty, occupational therapy, a little bit later, that helps kids with sensory dysregulation. Kids with autism, though, have some awesome strengths that as we're trying to learn about them as young children, you as parents need to be their advocate and mention all the good things about them and recognize those things. Kids with autism are not universally self-isolating. Some autistic kids are very socially motivated and love to be around people and love to cuddle and love to play. Typically, there's a strong focus on details, though, sometimes to the exclusion of the bigger picture. So noticing tiny details, visual thinking, maybe not auditory thinking, maybe not super tuned into what they're being told, but tuned into what they see and what they experience with their bodies. Kids with autism can have very strong areas of interest, which can develop from cartoon characters to mechanics to theater to really anything you can think of. So as they get older, these areas of interest may become real areas of expertise. So be aware of that and nurture that. Some of the typical areas of challenge can be social interaction, so not always understanding the parameters of what appropriate social interaction can look like. Communication, which can be a real struggle especially for young kids that are diagnosed with autism, and emotional regulation. I touched on that when I talked about sensory integration. Emotional regulation is another area that kids with autism can struggle with because their bodies and their impulses are super powerful and they don't have a lot of tools yet to modulate those impulses. So we might see some strong behavioral responses to situations. There's also much more to say, but I'm gonna just touch on some of the medical needs that parents and caregivers should be aware of that are more common for kids and adults with autism. There's a set of gastrointestinal needs that come up more frequently in autism. We're not exactly sure why, but constipation or reflux, allergies, very limited diet, all of those can be connected to the GI tract. And if any of those are concerns, speak to the pediatrician, try to get some good referrals in place for a specialist because they can really be super helpful. As kids get older, some of the behaviors you might see with young kids that you think, they're little, they're learning, might continue to prevail as they get older and still struggle with some strong emotional components as well as that kind of dysregulation. So you might see hyperactivity and impulsivity. You might see kids who hurt themselves or hurt others when they're feeling dysregulated. And you might also be aware that a child or as they grow up feel particularly anxious. Again, go to the pediatrician, point these out, request some specialized assistance around these concerns. Some of them, as kids get older, can be diagnosed and treated both behaviorally and medically. There are also a cluster of neurological and medical issues that are kind of self-explanatory here. But the big one I want to mention is sleep issues. It's very common for children with autism to have really dysregulated sleep, either difficulty falling asleep or difficulty staying asleep. So again, please speak to the pediatrician about that. The other issues on that list would be coming up and would be in the medical arena already. And you'd be obviously getting help if there were seizures. So that was not designed to scare anybody, but just to point out that things that come up that might be concerning and alarming, always bring to the pediatrician. So parents who have this new autism diagnosis or extended family, the next step I try to recommend for people is to educate yourself, right? There's this great guide here, a parent guide to autism that hopefully will come up as a hyperlink when you get the slides. But there are two main realms of intervention and support. One is the educational world, and the other is the world of therapies. And we're going to dive into education. I don't know if there are parents on the call who have children under the age of 3. I'm going to give a thumbnail sketch of early intervention services in case there are, or in case those of you who know families with young kids and would like the information so you can be of support to those parents. I'm going to provide that. Early intervention is a state-funded, actually federally mandated program that's offered across the state of Massachusetts to children under the age of 3 who have a variety of developmental delays and their families. It's a very family-focused service. It's a less medicalized kind of setup. There are home visits, there's parent coaching, behavioral support. Within early intervention programs, there can be occupational and physical and speech therapists to provide more specialized intervention, and is super helpful for kids with any kind of a medical or developmental concern, or even those at risk for those. I want to point out that early intervention also provides a number of key services to connect their clients, their children, with outside services. And I'm going to talk about how they do that for children approaching the age of 3 and the public school system. Public special education is available to children at the age of 3, which is the age that early intervention finishes, not coincidentally, that's how the funding moves. And special education is administered through local school districts. So whatever city or town you're in, that's your special education and public education home. At the age of 3, or really at any time where you seek special education for a child, you request evaluation by the public school district. And early intervention connects all parents at around the age of 2.5 to public special education so that their child will, as a part of the routine, get connected through an evaluation. The differences between education and early intervention are a little bit obvious because the world of education is focused on academics and functioning in a school system. Early intervention is focused on how kids function at home with their family routines. So they have a very different focus. School education teams are required to determine what services a child will need to learn the same curriculum as same age peers, make adequate progress, basically be educated within the age range that they fall into. The question that I got previously about other programs besides what's offered in the public school district. Public school districts start out offering what they believe the child needs to function in a classroom. So they do this initial test, they come up with a plan, an individualized education plan, and they proceed to offer those services to each child who requires those services. IEPs are individualized, so there isn't one generic plan. They evaluate each child using a team approach, so they come up with hopefully a reasonably accurate understanding of a child's needs and fit the services, fit the child's needs to the services that they can provide. This is the blueprint of the IEP. It gets redone every 3 years at least, but can be, the evaluation can be done more frequently than every 3 years if needed. The idea of those specialized autism schools that the questioner asked about, but that perhaps other people have heard about, that might be a better fit for a child. Typically, those are called out-of-district placements, and they're not the first choice of a public school district. Public school district is responsible for providing what they can within their district first, and then assessing if their services are not adequate, if they cannot provide what a child needs in a classroom environment, then they will consider an out-of-district placement. These programs, the out-of-district specialized schools, are very expensive. Families, of course, can choose to send their child if they pay out of pocket for them. If they can't afford that, and most people can't, they go through the public school district and follow along, advocating for their child to get their needs met at every step of the way. And the point where these out-of-district placements even come up is if the school district is not able to provide what a child needs. So it's, most children go through their public school district special education programs just fine with the services they need. And some kids do need that out-of-district placement. The path is through the school district, through negotiating with them around your child's needs. So hopefully that's a little bit about the plan, and how to access those out-of-district placements. I think what I actually should have mentioned is that the public school district is required to try to integrate your child as much as possible. So that's also their goal. They are not going to segregate or separate kids with special needs unless they need those specialized services outside of an integrated classroom. I'll explain that in a minute. Given that this program is about kids under the age of 7, I want to touch on what that might look like for a preschooler. So what the classroom experience of a preschooler might be, or a primary grade child. There are a couple of options for classroom experience, and this really ties into what I was saying about the school's requirement to integrate as much as possible. 2 kinds of classrooms available in school districts. One are called substantially separate classrooms. Those are smaller classrooms with a higher teacher-student ratio. For children with autism, they should be ABA-focused classrooms. I'll explain ABA in a little more detail in a minute, but that's a modality of teaching that really works well with kids with autism. The higher number of adults in the classroom can be a combination of special education teachers, trained teachers for that child's age, and paraprofessionals who are typically extremely experienced people but don't have all the credentials to be a lead teacher. That's the mix of adults in those classrooms. Kids who need that typically require those supports to follow a daily routine, to be safe, to communicate their wants and needs. The other option for a classroom, which I think for preschoolers is an integration classroom, although it may be called an inclusion classroom at different points in time. That's a mixed classroom. That's most typical classrooms in public schools right now, which combine students with special needs and typical students without IEPs. Kids with special needs can have a variety of different needs and a variety of different IEPs, but they learn best in a classroom with typically developing peers. So they do not need that specialized support to follow the routine or to stay safe or to communicate their wants and needs. And they will learn from observing and interacting with typically developing peers. Again, this would be a classroom that would have more than one adult in it. So there'd be a teacher, a lead teacher, possibly one or two paraprofessionals, but it would be a typical classroom size of, for preschool, maybe 15 kids or 20 kids. So it's a larger classroom, a lot more to navigate. Preschool options might be a half day or a full day. Number of days per week for preschool. Sometimes it's 5 days a week. Sometimes it's less than that, depends on the child's needs. An IEP can also offer occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy as part of the child's school week. All of this is spelled out in excruciating detail in an IEP, the document that's the blueprint for special education. As children move through kindergarten and obviously grade school, middle school, high school, they are in school for the same number of hours as a typically developing child. It's just preschool that might be a half day. Preschool is offered at no cost in every city and town in Massachusetts to children who qualify for an IEP, so children with autism. Two components of IEPs that are additional to what regular typical students might get is specialized transportation to and from school, and what they call extended school year, so a summer program, which is particularly useful for kids with autism because we don't want them to get out of the habit of going to school and losing skills over the summer. So those are the components of kind of a IEP for most kids, especially preschool age. Sometimes this works great and families are on the same page as their IEP team, and when they meet with the team, they understand each other and it sounds like a good plan to everybody involved. Sometimes there are disagreements and there's negotiation involved. For a number of families, they do sometimes require some specialized support in working with the public school district if they feel like big components of their child's ed plan are missing. And I want to share some information about what sorts of supports and information there is out there. So universally, for all parents of kids with IEPs, I totally recommend these no-cost information sites, whether or not you anticipate problems with the public schools or not. Federation for Children with Special Needs is an awesome nonprofit. They have parent trainings. They have information online. They have a call center. They also developed a terrific parent guide for special education, which I highly recommend everybody save, print, use as a resource. The other two listings here, there's a document that has timelines for special education, and there's this other call-in number, Mass Advocates Helpline. Both are sort of supplemental to what Federation for Children with Special Needs can offer. There is also in every town or city in Massachusetts something called a Special Education Parent Advisory Council, or CPAC, run by parent volunteers, sponsored by the public school district. They are trained parent volunteers who understand special education. They do different things in different districts because they're volunteers and they can kind of set up what they think works best for their parent population. Typically, they may offer meetings during the year, sort of get to know each other so that parents of different age, kids with special needs, get to know other parents and provide some support. They might have trainings, they might have social events. Super useful to check them out. You can find them on the public school district website if you dig around a little bit. That's sort of a helpful peer resource. There are also specialists who you can hire should you need to, educational advocates, attorneys, and educational consultants. All of these would be out-of-pocket expenses. No need to do it unless you need them. Spanmass.org has a list of educational advocates if anybody is curious or in need of seeking somebody. But I really highly recommend educating yourself about the system and becoming your child's best advocate so that you feel like you're doing everything that you can do on your child's behalf with public education. Kind of a mouthful. Hopefully that's making sense to those of you with some experience in this realm and is a reasonable introduction for those who are beginners. We're going to talk about therapies, different therapeutic supports. And the big one for kids with autism is ABA, or Applied Behavior Analysis. This is a link with a sort of a brief explanation of ABA. It's a teaching methodology that applies behavior principles so that by observing and learning about your child, you can understand what motivates them and therefore teach them new behaviors. So ABA teaches things like following directions or sitting in a chair to eat a meal or holding hands when child goes outside. And it does these things through behavioral methods. I'm not talking about punishment. There's absolutely no punishment. There's only positive reinforcement, which is basically things that make your child feel good about attempting to learn a new skill. So it can be a high five. It can be a short video that they love. It can be singing a song. It can be jumping on a trampoline for a minute. Any of those things that feel rewarding to your child can be used as motivators to teach them new skills. ABA also uses play as the main methodology to engage your child in a relationship where they can learn with their therapist and to keep them motivated to engage over time. Parents are a member of this team. They help set goals. They need to learn what the skills are, learn how to teach the skills that the therapists are teaching so that they can carry over during non-therapy hours. It doesn't mean that you're always on as a therapist, but it helps to be consistent across different environments. I did mention that they use ABA in school, and they do. In this part of the talk, I'm really talking about ABA that might be a home-based program or a center-based program outside of school hours, where they're tackling routines, safety, play, behavior at home. Who provides it? There's a team, a clinical team. There's a supervisor who's got a master's degree and a credential called BCBA. And there's a behavioral technician who's the hands-on therapist. It's super important that the BCBA be involved on a regular basis in the clinical supervision because they have experience and expertise, and they're also the main parent communicator. ABA is often recommended for 10 to 20 hours a week. It can take place at home or at a child care center if the child care center is amenable, or at a relative's house. There's a sort of a slightly different way to do it at an ABA center, which is their own independent site. There are choices out there. Different kinds of, both kinds of programs are available. I mentioned that early intervention connects with two kinds of services. One is public school. The other can be ABA for kids under the age of 3. They can connect you to ABA programs they contract with and at least facilitate getting started. There are a couple of challenges with ABA overall. One of them is that it's a very popular service and there are waiting lists at pretty much every program out there. Early intervention, if they work with your child before the age of 2.5, are likely to be able to help you get ABA through their connections before your child turns 3. At the age of 3, they'll lose that service, and families really will need to think about tackling waiting lists to find the service when their child is over the age of 3. This slide talks about some of the organizational piece of seeking ABA outside after your child turns 3. There are 2 websites here that I've posted that you can link to where you can search for ABA programs to generate a master list for yourself. Then you would call or email, sometimes do an online form to add your child to waiting lists. I recommend 3 to 5 waiting lists, more if there are programs in your area that accept your child's health insurance. As in all medical services, you have to make sure you're contracting with a program that takes your child's medical insurance. But more waiting lists is usually better. Waiting lists can be 6 months. Waiting lists can be 2 years or more. So this is a big part of the mad dash that parents of young kids try to do that makes life feel a little crazy for a while, is getting their child on multiple waiting lists. ABA programs have different philosophies, different staffing. My guidance is extremely practical, which is put your child on a bunch of waiting lists. As the programs contact you, then you can kind of talk to them about whether that particular program will be a good fit. You can request an intake appointment or conversation before they even start any of the billable services. Each ABA program, an ABA program that you choose will do their own assessment, mini assessment for your child. Hopefully they're ready to start services right away after that, and will collaborate with you to set goals. I would advise having regular meetings with the BCBA to talk about progress and challenges. This is a complicated process. Hopefully these outlines will be helpful for those of you diving in. I want to mention the other therapies that are available for kids and adults, and actually any individual. And some of the ways they apply to autism specifically. Speech language therapy. So we think of speech therapy as concerned with speech, right? Talking, but it does more than that. The way I think about it for autistic kids is it teaches functional communication, right? So how to get your needs met through communication. That can be speech as a tool, that can be sign language as a tool, that can be picture communication as a tool, that can be a tablet that's programmed with useful application for communication, and it's called augmentative alternative communication device, or AAC device. Any of those tools or all of them in combination can be useful to young children with autism as they're learning to communicate, and for older children and adults who remain only semi-verbal. Please be open-minded about what's available. Don't be hyper-focused on the speech alternative. Start where your child is and use professional advice to get the right kinds of communication supports. Occupational therapy is designed to work on three kinds of domains. One is fine motor skills, so using hands and eyes together for building towers with blocks, or using a pencil or a pen or scissors. More relevant to young kids with autism can be the realm of self-help skills. So feeding yourself, using utensils properly, brushing your teeth, tolerating what that feels like, and learning the skill of using a toothbrush. The big domain, which I mentioned before, is the sensory realm, which helps kids manage some of those overwhelming sensory impulses with a variety of techniques. If they are managing their sensory impulses, they can pay attention better. They can tolerate being in an environment where there's some demands made. So it's super helpful for young kids who are kind of navigating a very loud, crazy environment to have some help with that. And even in school, to help them manage their impulses so they can stay seated and learn, or be up and down and learn, whatever sensory tools are provided. Physical therapy is primarily focused on coordination, balance, muscle tone. A lot of kids with autism don't need this because they're super active. Some of those kids who are not sensory seekers, but are sensory avoiders and are very uncomfortable moving in certain types of ways, may benefit from physical therapy. I want to spend a few minutes before we finish talking about additional resources and supports, primarily for you, for the adults in the family. This slide is really important, financial and practical assistance. There's a state department called Department of Developmental Services, or DDS, in Massachusetts that offers case management and some financial supports and some behavioral supports at no cost to families. Your child is eligible with the autism diagnosis alone, and you can apply using this eligibility form website. You would print an application. I think it's one of the only places that still has a paper application. Print and mail it in. They don't require any financial information, only medical, diagnostic, school information to document your child's diagnosis. They have a 6-month lag, so they're about 6 months behind in processing applications, but it's super important, relatively simple, and will benefit your child for many years. This BMC website actually has a lot of good information about it, so I'd highly recommend that for everybody. Parents sometimes ask, is there an income support program, something that can give me some extra financial support for my child since I'm working less, or I'm required to pay for more things than I might otherwise have to pay for because my child has a disability. And there is. It's supplemental security income through the U.S. Social Security Administration. They look at 2 factors to determine eligibility. They look at your child's disability and the degree of impairment. They also look at the financial situation of the entire family. So they are looking at family income as well as disability. For families that have 2 working parents, or can kind of stretch a dollar and make things work. You may not qualify, you might not. You might not qualify for SSI. It's worth looking at this website if you have any questions about it. If you are in need of financial assistance, please apply. It's a long and complicated process. And if you're not going to qualify financially, that's why I kind of say, know who you are, don't bother. But if it will be helpful to your family and you need the assistance, by all means do. I want to mention something called Mass Health Common Health, which is a Mass Health program for children with disabilities. Mass Health is the state Medicaid program, and this is a sort of a little side note from Mass Health, where they offer this secondary insurance for kids with disabilities because parents with commercial insurance through employment may end up paying lots in copays, may have large deductibles, may really be burdened by the expense despite the fact that they have good commercial insurance. So Mass Health Common Health can supply a secondary insurance, which means another insurance, Mass Health, to pick up some of those extra costs. Again, this program looks at both your child's medical disability, autism, as well as financial situation of the family. So all families will qualify. Some families will be assigned a premium. So it's not always free. No way for me to predict, or even for us to predict, who would get that premium. So I recommend families go through and apply for this and figure out in the end whether the premium offsets the value of the secondary insurance. Let's see, this website is super helpful. Another helpful resource is Insurance Resource Center for Autism and Behavioral Health, the last one here. They have some good online information. They can help if you're confused about some Medicaid issues or other insurance issues related to autism services, and they can help you figure out how to advocate for your needs and situation. 3 categories of parent support that I want to mention. One is finding your tribe, right? Finding people, other parents like you going through this process. There are local autism support centers throughout the state. This is a website that has a map, and you can locate your autism support center through the map. It's free. Go to the website of the Autism Support Center, get on their email list, see what programs they have. You don't have to apply. You just call or you just contact them. AANE, or Association for Autism and Neurodiversity, is a similar setup, but it's not state funded, but it's a great organization that provides resources and parent support groups. Helps to get connected with other parents. CPAC is another opportunity to do that. I want to point out that these web resources and email listservs are also really useful. And for those who read books, here's some books. I want to finally mention that Lurie Center has additional parent caregiver workshops available. What you're hearing today is a workshop I do for Lurie Center several times a month. It's sort of the entry level, throw everything at you, try to help you figure out some of the information in your new landscape. If this has been helpful and you're interested in following up with something that has a little more depth and detail, Autism 101 is a 6-session program. Meets once a week for 6 weeks. And again, it's a free program. It's for parents and caregivers of children under the age of 6 who are trying to figure out autism, gives parents a chance to communicate with each other as well in your little Google group here. There's much more interaction and information on 6 different topics. We also have something called Behavior Basics, which is a 3-part series to talk about behavior. There's one on safety at home in the community. There's a workshop specifically about educational options for preschoolers. There's a workshop for parents of nonverbal children to work on early language development. There's a workshop on de-escalating challenging behaviors and many more. So there's a link here for the workshop. Lurie Center front desk can register you for whichever one you're interested in. They're open to the community. Children don't have to be patients of the Lurie Center or even Mass General Brigham. So I encourage people to take a look at that and connect with workshops if any of them seem helpful. The slide that I really like that I don't always get to is just kind of reassuring parents that your child isn't a label. They are perfect, whoever they are, right? Parents may be looking at a young child, a primary school age child, and think, oh, what's going to happen in the future? And nobody can predict that, but we do know that all children learn, that every child's response to treatment is different, so there's no crystal ball. But what we do know, and which is common sense, and you all need to remember that, is your love, support, and guidance are the foundation for all your children's successes, right? Nobody expects you to be a perfect parent, just a good enough parent, and recognize how important your relationship is with your child, and how much that's a foundation of everything. 3 quickies, or 4 quickies. Remember to stay in contact with the pediatrician as the hub of all your child's medical services, autism services included, to try to stay organized with all the paperwork I'm sure you're getting flooded with at this point. Continue to learn, ask questions, and develop those advocacy skills, and build your crew, build your team. Build the people that are going to be supportive to you, helpful to you, knowledgeable, and can help you advocate and care for your child in the most loving way possible. Thank you all so very much, and I'm turning it over to Amy.
Thank you, Susan. This was extremely helpful. And as Susan had mentioned, she is offering, for those who are interested in a copy of her slide deck, feel free to email the Blum Center at pflc@partners.org, and be happy to share that with you because I know you provided some wonderful resources in there. And I also did want to put a plug. You had mentioned your workshops, one specifically around safety at home and in the community. We are actually partnering with Nicole Simon from Lurie Center to put on a webinar next month on this very topic. So save the date. It's going to be offered on Wednesday, August 7th, 12 to 1. And I'm going to try to include that in the chat for everyone. So
Great.
Copy. And if you would like a copy of that flyer, feel free to email us again at pflc@partners.org. I also did want to remind everyone that today's session is being recorded. So if you're interested in viewing the recording, it'll be made available on the Blum Center website at massgeneral.org/Blum-Center. I don't believe I see any additional questions in the chat before we end today's session. Susan, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with the audience?
No, I hope this was helpful, and please follow up with additional workshops.
Thank you, Susan.